All right, everybody, let's pull that tarp. My guest today is host and reporter for Big Ten Network and the Chicago Cubs Marquee Sports Network, Elise Menaker. Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Hey, Andrew, thank you.
Elise, it's great to have you. I'm a big fan of yours and the work that you do. Let's start at the beginning of your break into journalism and broadcasting. What role did internships play and kind of taking on some of those challenges early play in your initial success?
Yeah, internships were pretty much everything early on for me. So that's how I figured out I wanted to go into broadcast. It was a series of internships. My mom really emphasized going through high school. Like, you have to have internships. You want to figure out what you want to do. And that's kind of what created my career path. Because originally, I thought I wanted to be fashion editor of Vogue magazine. So I had a lot of internships in magazine. And it was actually through those internships, I realized the longevity when it comes to that career didn't interest me as much. I saw a magazine changing, which I always say, joke's on me now. TV has changed, equally as much when we talk about newspapers going away or things like that. But it was just kind of, I always thought I would want to leave the sports in me behind, which was where that interest came from. I even took fashion design classes at the Art Institute in Chicago. And it was through all of those things that I realized I can't really let the athlete in me go. So then I had an internship at a sports marketing firm. I thought, I love the sports part, hate the 9-to-5 desk job. The following summer, and this was my summer going into my senior year of college, I had an internship at ABC7 in Chicago here. And that's when I realized it was in the sports department. I was logging games. I was going to games, doing pre and post interviews. That's where I covered Mark Buehrle's Perfect Game. Just a luck of the draw type day at work where I'm going, getting pre and post sound. It ends up being his perfect game. So that's when, literally that moment, I was like, okay, yes. I told my parents, best day of my life. I got to do this for the rest of my life. And so kind of here I am ever since. That's been the track that I've been on.
Perfect game during an internship. I mean, that kind of sets the bar pretty high.
And that's what they said. They're like, every day is not going to be like that. My parents said that. And I was like, no, if this could be the best, I'm there for the ride, even for those, moments few and far between.
I'm a big fan of that story you share there, Elise, because, for me, internships were such a big part of accelerating my career as well. Now, I don't work today in sports per se, but my first internship was with a sports agent. I worked for a baseball agent in New Jersey. I was in high school, and my parents I didn't even have a driver's license. They would drive me once or twice a week, and I would do all kinds of different things for the baseball agent. And then he recommended that I get involved on the team side in minor league baseball. He said, Andrew, that's a great place for you to learn like anything in business, really. So I sent like 15, 20 resumes out to minor league teams, and I get an internship with the New York Yankees minor league affiliate. And that's kind of where the name of this show, Everybody Pulls the Tarp, really begins. Because on my first day, and the listeners have heard this story a million times, first day, I'm in the conference room. They're welcoming all the new interns, and they say, bring a pair of old clothes tomorrow and keep them in the locker room because you're all going to be helping the grounds crew run the tarp on and off the field. And we did it like 15, 16 times. And then you get to the end of that process, and you're like, this is kind of annoying. Like, this is really irritating. I want to be learning the business of sports, front office. But here I am kind of helping the grounds crew. And, we learn, right, that, they've got a much bigger budget up at Yankee Stadium and a much bigger grounds crew, but everybody in the minor leagues has to pitch in. And for me, as I went on through my career, I realized that I liked being around these people that I called the tarp pullers, people who were willing to kind of step in and do whatever it takes. And I think when you're an intern or when you're early in your career, and frankly, any time in your career, you have to be willing to kind of take on some of these odd tasks to kind of get ahead a little bit. So for you, can you remember, examples of things that maybe didn't seem so glamorous at the time that, helped you kind of hone your craft?
Well, actually, so post internships, right? So then I'm applying for jobs after college. So right after college, literally 2 days later after I graduate, I go to Sweden where I play pro softball. So I come back from Sweden and I'm trying to look for jobs. Well, I had probably sent out like 100 resumes for my first TV gig. And I hadn't gotten anything. Maybe I even had like some interviews here and there, but nothing really sticks out to me, right? So I then I thought it'd been, I think at that point, like a couple of months. So I thought I need to now figure something else out. Not necessarily career, but I need to figure out how can I get a bite on like a lead on a job. So I went to the winter meetings. Actually, I think they were in Orlando at the time. And for those of you who don't know, there's actually, so the winter meetings are where, the front office personnel for Major League Baseball teams get together, and that's kind of where you see all the deals get done. There's also a job fair there, and I'm not sure a lot of people know that. So I go there, and it's basically just a ton of bulletin boards set up with tons of jobs posted. I was applying to be like a mascot. I was applying to whatever it took to get into sports, and I thought, if I can just get in the stadium, from there, I'll kind of try to get the broadcast side of it. So it's funny that you mentioned that minor league stuff. Now, what ended up happening is I actually got a call for what ended up being my first job while I was in Orlando. So I was looking for a job at the winter meetings, but it had to be what I say, probably one of my last resumes that I sent out. And then we sent DVDs. So now you just send links, to your demo reel, but then we were sending DVDs. So it had to be one of the last, applications that I filled out and sent. They called me. I ended up going to that interview in Columbia, Missouri, I think like a week after I got back, if that. And then I got that job. So it's kind of funny just how you mentioned that, because even the process itself, I feel like, can be pulling the tarp, right? As you're trying to look for opportunities, you're at times looking at or pursuing things or going in a direction that you never thought that you would have to go. And for instance, that first job of mine, my first two jobs, were in news reporting. So I didn't want to be a news reporter. I wanted to go into sports. And actually, every news director I worked for had known this, the ones who even hired me for news, but I couldn't get a job in sports. So the way that I kind of always saw it was I'm getting experience. All of that experience can be transferred to sports. So in that way, that was kind of pulling the tarp, doing something that I didn't want to do, but I had to see the long-term benefit of it. And I still stand by, I wouldn't be the sports reporter I am today without that news background. So you just never know how things are going to impact you, because it may not be your first thought as, making sense. Like it doesn't line up. It's not as linear as you thought, that process or that road, but it ends up, you kind of just make it work, right? If you're really passionate about what you want to do, you may sometimes veer off that road, but you get right back on it, and it'll be in a way maybe even better than you thought. And then along the way, as I was doing those news jobs, even in sports, I was one-man banding. So I shot, wrote, edited, produced, you named it. I was doing it to put together not just stories that aired, but sportscasts. So when I had my 2-3 minutes of time, this is when I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I was a full-time sports reporter and anchor, I'm putting together graphics that I want to include in, the 30-second, story on the Bucks, because maybe we don't have video yet of the game. It hasn't dropped, so I can't put that in. So I have to put up a graphic of the score or something. So all of that, did I want to be handling the rundown and timing it and all of that? No, but man, does it help me today. Because the more you can understand, there's never any harm in having knowledge. So the more that I've understood, the more not only I've been able to relate to people, but it actually makes my job easier in the end. Not easy, but by having that understanding, you kind of see what everyone's doing, and you hope in turn by understanding that you're actually helping them and you're more of a team player, because that's how I always see it, that it's basically like I'm on a team, right? So when you're on air, you're just one piece of a really big puzzle.
That's really interesting, Elise. When I interviewed Samantha Harris, who used to host Dancing with the Stars, she told me a very similar story. She said when she was early on in her news career at Entertainment Tonight, she did everything. She wrote copy. At the time, they had hard copy, like VHS tapes that she was running around the studio from truck to truck. And she said that when she reached the height of her fame at Dancing with the Stars, it gave her empathy for everybody else's role in the process, understanding that she was really just a cog in the wheel. That was kind of how she described it to me. So when you think about kind of continuing to kind of take that step and learn and kind of put all this together, how did you hone the craft of really identifying these really neat stories to tell, right? Like the fundamentals of journalism.
Yeah, it's funny you ask, because that was a huge part why I went back to grad school. So I mentioned how 2 days after I graduated from Cornell, I went to Sweden. I got my first job in Columbia, Missouri as a news reporter. It was actually after that job I went back to grad school, because I didn't feel confident that I had the fundamentals to do things on my own. So I mentioned the one-man banding, where I'm going out and shooting everything on my own and doing kind of everything on my own. Well, when you do news especially, there's a lot of even like legal questions and ethical questions you may run into. Can I go on this person's lawn? Can I use that sound bite? And I wanted to have the confidence, especially when I was out on my own, that I knew exactly what I was doing and how to approach the situation. So that was one of my, the reasons that I went back to grad school. What I got out of that was also something that I was looking for, which was how to put together a story, essentially. So undergrad at Cornell was fantastic, but I didn't learn journalism. And so that's what Northwestern taught me, which was how to approach the story. Who do I go to for interviews? Why am I going to that, person? Or even just editing, because, right, like I'm editing my story. So how can I edit them better? Because I always say, in this industry, you can have a great thing to say. You can have great information, but if you don't present it in an entertaining way, people aren't really going to listen, especially because the market is so saturated right now with social media and so many different places to go to for a lot of the same information at times. So that's really where I felt like I learned that. And I had a good foundation from my first job in Columbia, Missouri, knowing what I struggled with, knowing where I had questions. So when I went into Northwestern, I was very deliberate in what I got out of that program, because having experience already in the industry, knowing I wanted to get back into it, but where I felt like I needed to improve, that's how I approached. It was a very rigorous year of schooling. And I also networked a ton. I wanted to leave school making the most of every single experience. And so it was basically through learning what makes a great story, having my foundation, a little bit of it in journalism or in the industry already, and then moving to my next job in Decatur, Illinois, where I felt like I was able to have a little more freedom. Like I knew exactly what I wanted to do to tell a good story. And now I could be creative. Now I could tell that story and not feel like I had to follow everything to a T, but I could follow exactly what I needed to get the who, what, why, when out, but in a more creative way. And sometimes the creativity doesn't apply. You're telling a very just direct, story but when I had the opportunity, because I had more of that in Decatur, I really felt like that's where I grew the most as a journalist.
I think your stories are super entertaining, Elise. I love like the joy and the passion that you bring to the craft, right? I mean, I've seen you in home run derbies. I've seen you throw 2-point conversion passes in swing games.
Yes, all of it.
You've cooked brisket with one of my guys at Penn State. I mean, but you're also able to really communicate, kind of the cold hard facts too in the middle of a game or in studio. How do you kind of balance that? Where it's, hey, we're going to have some fun here. We're going to just tell a story straight right here.
That's where I think my news background has really come in handy, because actually it was when I got my sports job in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that I felt I wanted to become looser, if you will. So I was so used to being more structured in news that I carried that over initially in Wisconsin, which was fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I didn't feel it was like my style, right? Like I wasn't my best self on camera because I was still following what I felt like was like the news structure. And especially in sports, that's where you can be a little more creative, fun. One of the reasons I wanted to go into sports always is you can smile on camera. A lot of the times the news, and rightfully so, you're telling serious stories because you have to communicate a lot of important things to the public. But sports, you have a chance to communicate a lot of fun things. And so I felt like I was almost, for myself, even at times, like I was like, oh, I can get this out in a little bit different way, or I can say it a little more fun, right? Like this is all about writing. So it sometimes is disguised, is everything that you're seeing in a lot of the work I do, whether I'm physically writing it or not, I'm writing it sometimes in my head. It comes down to writing. So how am I putting together these sentences and even the words I choose to use? And that's kind of how you get your message across or the story across. So I felt like at times I could kind of change my lingo or adjust it to fit more of that sports feel, if you will. And so but I like that I still have the awareness that when something calls for a more serious tone, or maybe it's not the time to play around with that stuff, that's when I'm able to kind of juggle the two. And now since news and sports crossed over a lot more, it's funny because I just kind of channel my news background. So when I have to be more serious, I just kind of go into that mode. And because I did it for, a few years, it's not even that uncomfortable for me, which I'm thankful for, because at times it can feel out of your comfort zone, but I'm thankful I have that experience to where I was very used to telling a lot of more serious stories.
Well, Penn State didn't give us Penn Staters a lot to smile about in the second half of the year, but your stories always do, Elise. So I appreciate that.
Sure, that's a goal.
Let's talk about your research process. So I have interviewed when I interviewed Melanie Newman, who
Yeah,
does
I love
play-by-play for the
Yes.
Orioles. She told me about a process that she has with.
So yes, she's one of my favorites. Yes.
She told me about a process where she basically takes index cards and she writes everything that she possibly can down about the player on an index card. And then she references these things and she tracks these things. Do you have a system? What's your process? What does your research and preparation look like?
So I can definitely tell you my preparation always involves a lot of writing. I get made fun of a lot for it because we do so much on our computers today and type it out. And I do that. I've actually gone in that direction more because of the accumulation of information, how you use it so much more over time. Because when I was in local news, everything was very day to day. So if I did one story, that was not going to impact what I did the next day. Maybe saving contacts or certain information was valuable, but it was more like done with this, move on to the next. Now, really a lot of sports, everything, today is really impacted by the day before and the day before. So you have that more cumulative effect. So I write a lot. Something that I do when I do games, and it's even a system that I still adjust and am working on, but I am a very visual person. So I actually print out a diamond and like a baseball diamond or a softball diamond, and I write who's at every position. Now I do this more for softball because you have less players, pitchers in baseball, you're going to see more of those. But for softball, you'll see me like I write little notes underneath each player to remind me of something or maybe something that's really important. And then that's how I know kind of who's where. Now, if there's changes before a game, because I might write someone at shortstop and she might not play there, I adjust it. But that's what I actually like doing for softball because I like seeing it. And that's kind of how I navigate it. For baseball, I have a whole system in OneNote that seems pretty popular among broadcasters. And that's what helps me navigate the positions that way. So while it may not be on a baseball diamond, I have categories of first base, second base, and I kind of click throughout the game. And that's where I put Melanie, do it on note cards. That's kind of where I put my notes and highlights in that. Because you do have time. That's one benefit during a baseball game, that you can look at that stuff, kind of see what you did. And then, oh, I wrote down this stat. He just did that. And that's kind of how I put it all together. So for sideline, it's much more, I've simplified it a lot more. Really what's most important, like say when I'm on the football sideline, is having depth charts or my story notes. So now I print those out. I used to write all those, but now I print them out and I kind of highlight the key phrases so I can see what's going on and be like, oh, I can apply this right now, or this would be a good time to get this in. So depending on my role, it's all very different, but I'm a very hands-on, like when I anchor, all you'll see is notes all across my rundown, because I just have to see it all. And that's even how I remember. So I may not even ever look at it, but by writing it, that's how I kind of remember it.
Well, it's like science tells us that like writing things down actually helps us remember them and like commit them, to our knowledge base more than typing them. I'm like a hardcore like hand note writer. I put things in notebooks. I mean, I'll use the OneNote and the Google Docs a little bit. I have tons
of notebooks that I just won't even throw out still. That I'm like, I should probably get rid of this. Like, I don't need this from 2017 or something.
Although you never know, right? I mean, a player or a story that you pick up, you pick up a little nugget at some point, and maybe it's relevant in a few years. You've mentioned a few times now your background in sports. Obviously, a 4-year starter at Cornell softball, the Cornell Sports Hall of Fame. How has that helped you? Well, let me ask it that a different way. Has it helped you?
Yeah, and in ways that I never even thought about. So because I didn't know I wanted to be a sports broadcaster until going into my senior year of college, I didn't play sports with the intent of trying to keep things for my future, meaning let me remember this so that when I'm talking about it on air, I'll know, oh, this will apply, which I'm really thankful for because I strictly just enjoyed my sports experience. I saw it as fun, meeting some of my best friends for life, and challenging, right? Sports push you. So by going through all of that, that's now, whether we're talking about the job itself or interacting with people on the job or meeting people, that's kind of where sports come in. So I believe, because I love sports so much, I believe everyone should play sports. And if not sports, playing an instrument, or anything that challenges you and pushes you and you can try to be better at every day. And that's kind of what I gathered from sports, was the way that you're constantly trying to get better every single day and pushing yourself from when you were like 3 years old to when I was 21 years old or beyond, 22. Just the progress and the time and commitment and sacrifice. And it's that whole journey that now I take into when I call games. Because there were things as a softball player that I went through that now as I call games, I'm like, oh, I get this. And it wasn't even that a deliberate, let me bottle this up. And then one day because I never knew I would be talking about a girl in a, first and third situation, how should she approach at the plate? I just gather from my experiences, and because I had so many at-bats in different situations, and I had to do so many different things, because yes, I was a power hitter, but I was asked to bunt, I had to practice, I had to do it all. So I just try to take from every little thing, and from things that you didn't even realize, things that my coach was telling my teammates that now I take, because I was like, oh yeah, I remember when he was, I at times, my freshman year, he wanted to try to put me at first base. And so even just learning the footwork for that, what I was being told for that, never thinking that would ever, apply to anything. But it's all those things that you pick up along the way that now I kind of put together that I hope, make my broadcast better.
I think you're touching on so many great points here, Elise. I think, going back even a few minutes, right? The comments you made about writing. And I mean, yeah. I'm convinced that writing is like one of the, if not the number one, like one of the top couple of superpowers, right? That drive a successful career. I mean, if you can write and more broadly communicate effectively, there's a lot of things that you can do successfully. And then when you think about your experience in sport and specifically like college athletics, it requires a lot of discipline, like you said, a lot of time, and you're kind of have to create your own schedule to some degree, or stick to a rigorous schedule that someone else sets for you. And you can apply these skills as you get into the quote unquote real world. One of the things I'm always curious about, somebody like you who balances a lot of different gigs, right? You've got the football stuff, you've got the baseball stuff, different sideline, studio. How do you balance it all and keep it all organized?
Yeah. So I think it's almost like what you're saying from my playing experience. I love balancing. I love juggling. I actually think it makes me better. I love having a lot of interests and pushing myself in different ways. So it's kind of funny because I never really thought about it until I started doing it. But like in softball, my offense was always what came to mind, or what people looked at me at first. But I always took great pride in my defense. So I pushed myself over the years to really get better at defense, because I didn't want someone to just look at me offensively, but I wanted them to be like, she's also a great third baseman. So now that's kind of, oddly enough, I think I've just kind of taken that mindset, and that's now what I do when I'm reporting, when I'm hosting, or when I'm doing analysis. I don't want there to be a drop off, right? I don't want people to say she's a great host and an okay reporter. I want it to be equal across the board. So I feel like I thrive in those situations, and they all help each other. So as I was taking on each role and growing in those roles, for instance, in analysis, you have to be very deliberate with what you say and when you say it and how you say it, because you don't have a lot of time. I'm a talker, right? I can, whatever you need, we can fill the time and I got it. But sometimes that's not what's needed or wanted. So I had to learn to be very concise, and that's something I still work on in baseball and softball. But then that also helps if you think about it when it comes to hosting or reporting. In football sidelines, you don't have a lot of time to tell your story. So you have to get in and out. So that kind of helped me prepare me for softball, right? But now it's like it's a circular thing where they're helping each other. It even helps hosting, because sometimes you don't have time to, lead into a topic for a minute. It's like you got to get in and out. So you learn kind of like different ways how they all help each other. I've never seen one as, today I'm going to host and I only do this. It's kind of like I'm taking all the skills and then just catering them to exactly what's going to help that specific role. Because it is true that hosting is going to be very different than sideline reporting. My prep is different, but it's all kind of the same animal. And then you just try to make it, I've learned over time what's going to make this prep more effective to help my hosting. So like I've learned for sideline, sometimes simplifying more than having a ton of information. Or I've learned for hosting, I like having certain information and I can leave other things as I lead into an analyst. I don't need to be the expert, right? I'm hosting, I'm leading into an analyst. So let's set them up and make sure I know the topic well enough so that they can do a good job too. And we can have a good conversation. So you see how kind of like all the pieces come together and they all help each other. And then in the end, I feel like they keep me fresh. So it may sound like, oh my gosh, but it actually is what keeps me motivated and keeps me fresh because like I said, I just have always loved the versatility that I hope that I can bring.
Do you like intentionally try and collect feedback from others? Do you say, hey, like, can you watch this little segment I did? What do you think? What do you think of last week? Or no? Yeah. Is it more of an introspective type of thing?
It's more of my parents always have given me that. So my parents were in the industry, and I think that's why I don't seek it out because I feel like I'm always getting it anyways, whether I've asked or not. But it's in such a positive way. I really believe that early on they helped me grow so quickly because a lot of the times the feedback that they were giving me because they know the industry so well. I would send my dad, like, I'd be like, I love this story, the way I edit all that. And then he'd be like, maybe just add like a nap pop there or something next time, or maybe put that shot here, so I was getting legitimate like feedback from him. And I think that's really kind of what's helped me. And sometimes I actually don't want the feedback, not that I'm not open to it, but I don't seek it out a lot of the times because I look at myself a lot and I'm kind of constantly evaluating myself. It doesn't always mean I'm the best evaluator, but I'm pretty hard on myself. So I feel like I'm always kind of looking to improve and looking at, how did that, like I can speak fast a lot of times, right? So I got to slow down. I have to be aware of that. So just like trying to pick up on things myself and trying to be honest with myself about where I'm at. But yeah, I feel like sometimes it can make you overthink if I get too much feedback. And so I want to maintain being who I am, but also continuing trying to improve. So I think it's a very fine balance. But I do like getting feedback because it's interesting to hear how other people see you, how they're perceiving you, or how you're coming off. Because sometimes things cannot be as bad as you think, or sometimes you don't even notice certain things.
Elise, what would you be doing if you weren't doing broadcasting? Is there anything else?
I truly feel that this is I feel like I've been put on this earth to do this. So this is where I see myself for the rest of my life. But I watch HGTV so much that I would probably in some other life, I could be a realtor or a designer. Like I mentioned, I wanted to go into design, like fashion design, but maybe now it's turned into like interior design. Or I love dancing. I always had thought that I would be like a dancer. I took dance classes for a long time growing up. So I always say in another life, I would be a dancer. So it's always, I feel like if you notice like more creative route, right? Like I like to be creative, design. So I'm not a numbers science person. So I'm not going to be a doctor or anything. I can tell you that much.